Africa over 6% of the Earth's surface and is home to more than 1.1 billion people, making it the second largest and second most populous continent in the world. But it remains close to last in terms of gross domestic product, despite its abundant natural resources. Africa also lacks widespread access to modern healthcare and has the highest illiteracy rates on the planet. It's also home to extensive human rights abuses despite being the birthplace of modern civilization, and despite centuries of exploitation at the hands of other nations. Many African countries have failed to harness a central drive to unite in the face of oppression. Instead, in 2020, Africa was the sole continent where political violence rose relative to the year prior. More than 17,200 distinct events of political violence were recorded, with over 37,600 fatalities. Old conflicts are ongoing and getting worse, and new conflicts are following a growth cycle of diffusing and escalating. The reasons behind a seemingly never-ending cycle of civil war in Africa are deeply misunderstood. They are often attributed to African governments being weak or incapable of preventing violence, yet somehow the stereotype of African leaders being brutal, omnipresent, and repressive coexist. Another common scapegoat in assigning blame is the perceived dominance of rebel groups. In reality, there are far fewer rebel groups across Africa than other types of armed groups. Most of these groups are small, weak, and contribute to patterns of violence in insignificant statistical amounts. What then is the real reason for African nations being stuck in this inescapable cycle of violence? Profit. African civil wars are a profitable business, and groups within Africa and outside are profiting as millions suffer. Colonialism allowed Europeans to extract natural resources from Africa, leaving behind leaders who exploited gold, diamond, timber, oil, and wildlife to benefit the wealth of their own regional and ethnic groups or their bank accounts. Working with outside nations and countries, African warlords have shaped an economy where conflict is more profitable than peace, murder more profitable than industry.
Il a tué 5 personnes et le matin après il a tué notre soeur. Pour cela que nous sommes aussi allés lui attaquer, brûler la maison et faire un tapage.
In a recent case in the Netherlands, prosecutors convicted a key source of financing to Charles Taylor, the 22nd president of Liberia, a convicted war criminal. After training under Libyan dictator Gaddafi, Taylor founded the rebel group National Patriotic Front of Liberia and launched a Gaddafi-funded armed uprising that started the first Liberian civil war. The war sparked a national ethnic conflict over control of Liberia's natural resources, including diamonds, timber, and rubber. Taylor won the 1997 presidential election, running under the slogan, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." During his time in office, Taylor funded the Sierra Leone Civil War, aiding the rebel Revolutionary United Front through weapons sales in exchange for blood diamonds. Due to the UN embargo against arms sales, these weapons were sold through arms smugglers like Victor Bout, the so-called merchant of death, who sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of firearms across his decades-long career. Taylor himself was quietly diverting and stealing nearly $100 million during his presidency, amounting to roughly half of the total government revenue. In June of 2003, the prosecutor to the Special Court for Sierra Leone announced that Taylor was charged with war crimes, that he had created and backed the RUF rebels who were accused of murdering thousands of civilians and recruiting child soldiers, among other atrocities. Taylor was also believed to have harbored Al-Qaeda members connected to the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Taylor agreed to resign as presidency in exchange for a U.S. peacekeeping troop presence in Liberia. The U.S. handed over logistical support to a California company called PAE Government Services Incorporation, which netted a cool $10 million contract from the U.S. State Department. After a brief escape, Taylor was extradited and tried for war crimes in the Netherlands. The Special Court for Sierra Leone unanimously ruled that he was guilty of all 11 counts of aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity. During his defense, Taylor testified that American conservative evangelist Pat Robertson was awarded a Liberian gold mining concession in 1999 and offered to lobby the Bush administration to support Taylor in return. Robertson's company, Freedom Gold, failed to find any gold, which was, I am sure he would claim, an act of God. Had the company turned a profit, Robertson would likely have been in well over his head with war crimes, much like Dutch entrepreneur and arms dealer Guus Kuijnhoven. Kuijnhoven carried out business operations in Liberia since the 1980s after being deported by the US for attempting to sell 6 stolen artworks, including a Rembrandt. He was the head of the Oriental Timber Corporation, the leading timber lodging company in Liberia during the Civil War, which he used as a front for smuggling and selling weapons. Through Charles Taylor, Kuijnhoven sanctioned and solicited acts like the burning of homes in rural villages and the widespread rape of women and children in exchange for large areas for the exploitation of the lodging business. Taylor named Kuijnhoven as his pepper bush, a Liberian expression that means something important to you in the financial context. Kuijnhoven was sentenced in absentia to 19 years in prison for aiding and abetting war crimes and arms trafficking. Let's do a quick recap. One period of civil war in one nation in Africa. Profiteers Charles Taylor, Gaddafi, arms smugglers including Victor Bout, government contractor PAE, foreign-owned businesses like Oriental Timber Corporation, and foreign businessmen such as Guus Kuijnhoven, with evangelist Pat Robertson attempting to profit. 2. All of this is without even mentioning the thousands of rebels who pursue work under Taylor in an attempt to avoid death, the security and military forces that pocketed payment, and dozens more unnamed profiteers who avoided prosecution and continued to earn from new conflicts in Africa. While Liberia has enjoyed nearly 2 decades of peace and stability following the Second Civil War, there is still much profit to be made in other conflicts on the African continent. In the Central African Republic has been torn apart by war and ethnic cleansing for nearly 20 years, creating an economy rife for conflict profiteers. In a country with over 1.5 million displaced citizens, foreign governments and entrepreneur militias reap the only wealth that is being extracted from the nation's $0 GDP. French beverage giant Castel Group is the 3rd largest wine producer worldwide, the 2nd largest brewer in Africa, and a major bottling partner for Coca-Cola, with billions of dollars in revenue each year. For nearly 2 decades, Castel Group has been operating Sucrerie Africaine de Centrafrique, African sugar refinery of the Central African Republic, SUCAF RCA, in CAR. In late 2014, SUCAF RCA arranged a security arrangement with an armed rebel group, the Union for Peace in Central African Republic, or UPC, in exchange for payment for securing SUCAF RCA's factory and sugarcane fields and unrestricted movement on key roads. UPC agreed to support assuring the company's monopoly of sugar distribution, including through forced seizure of smuggled sugar, mainly from Sudan, which was then brought to SUCAF RCA's factories and sold under one of their brand names. SUCAF RCA established a sophisticated system to finance the militias through direct and indirect cash payments, effectively financing mass killings, abductions, torture, the recruitment of child soldiers, and sexual violence. Despite clear evidence that Castro Group was aware of the human rights violations committed by the UPC, SUCAF RCA was allowed to continue financing and providing logistical support to the UPC and other criminal groups in CAR for more than 6 years. The African continent comprises the majority of the Castro Group's activities and accounts for 80% of its revenue. The patriarch behind Castro Group, Pierre Jesus Sebastien Castro, is now the 9th richest Frenchman in the world, having amassed a fortune built on the back of African civil war. In their most egregious attack to date, Castro-founded UPC murdered more than 112 civilians at the Alindao IDP camp. In CAR, foreign powers have conducted a proxy war by exploiting regional and local actors to advance political, economic, and geostrategic agendas. Russia and France in particular have funded this private war on African soil. Russian Wagner Group, a semi-state security actor led by an oligarch with close ties to Vladimir Putin, has been tasked with implementing the Kremlin foreign policy in CAR in exchange for their allyship in ensuring the re-election of President Teodora. The Wagner Group has been granted exploration and exploitation licenses, which have allowed them to purchase gold and diamonds sources from rebel-controlled zones. Individuals associated with the Wagner Group have allegedly facilitated the deployment of Sudanese mercenaries led by Ali Kushab, leader of the Janjaweed militia responsible for the genocide in Darfur. The government of France is also suspected of forming and maintaining close relationship with members of armed rebel groups to advance French interests, including the UPC. Pro-French actors and military networks have deliberately chosen to support armed rebels that occupy territories with CAR's highest population density to wide more influence over elections. France, like Russia, is enabling war profiteers to make a fortune out of the suffering and misery of the CAR civilians in the name of political advantage. These are just a few examples of the massive profiteering that is occurring largely without consequences, in direct connection with African civil wars. Elsewhere, conflict gold is smuggled and purchased by foreign entities. Former President Joseph Kabila of the Democratic Republic of Congo managed to stash away millions of dollars of Congolese funds in foreign investment properties while funneling another $85 million to Saudi oil. South Sudanese businessmen sanctioned by the US are skirting sanctions to the tune of nearly $4 billion in government contracts. A Zimbabwean business empire is flourishing under ventures with Russian firms in corrupt platinum mines. Everywhere you turn, there are examples of governments, groups, and individuals pocketing a tidy sum as African countries continue to rank among the most impoverished and malnourished in the world. Women die in childbirth because medical care has been disrupted. Civilians are pressed for tax at random roadblocks run by rebel groups. Parents bury not one or two but all of their children when they die from hunger. An investigative and policy organization called The Sanctuary seeks to disable multinational predatory networks that benefit from conflicts, repression, and kleptocracy by calling for the prosecution of war criminals and exposing government leaders and business operations that profit from the suffering of others in Africa. Only 6 years old, The Sanctuary already has archives full of evidence of civil war profiteering, much of it across the African continent. Until peace is more profitable than war, Africa will continue to be the perfect breeding ground for warlords, entrepreneuring militias, corrupt governments, and foreign nations and businesses looking to profit amidst the chaos and conflicts. Thank you for joining me on this installment of the Echoes of the Motherland. If you learned something today, make sure you like this video and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode.